In 2000, I will talk about the Baia Mare cyanide disaster. Baia Mare, a city of 108,000 in the Maramureş region of northwestern Romania, has historically been home to mineral deposits. Described as a town with rich mineral deposits as early as 1347 in the manuscripts of King Lagios I, it is still known today for its mines rich in precious metals such as gold and silver, as well as base metals such as copper, iron, lead, and nickel. It was here in the late 1980s that a partnership between Esmeralda Exploration, an Australian mining company, and a Romanian government-owned company set out to open a new gold mine, the Aurul mine. While there are potentially many risks in opening a mine, the biggest risk to the environment is the use of cyanide, which is extremely harmful to living things, to separate gold from the ore extracted from the mine. If gold is processed in an open plant, a common gold separation method known as leaching or extraction, cyanide is sprayed on the ore extracted from the mine in the open air. This cyanide binds to gold ions, making the gold soluble in water, and this method alone can yield gold with a purity exceeding 96%. Additional methods such as centrifugation can increase the purity even further. But because the cyanide used does not disappear immediately and there is a lot of waste in this process, the cyanide liquid from the process is first stored in huge tailings ponds. As you can imagine, even the smallest leak in these tanks can cause a huge environmental crisis, and there are many examples throughout history. This is exactly the kind of disaster that happened in Baia Mare in 2000. The Aurul mine, named after the Romanian word for gold, received the necessary permits in 1999 and was officially commissioned in May. The mine was greeted with great excitement in the region, not only because on paper it would operate in Baia Mare for 10, 12 years, possibly up to 25 years, creating hundreds of much-needed jobs, not only because it would process 2.5 million tons of mine waste per year, extracting 1.6 tons of gold and 9 tons of silver each year, but also because the company had agreed to clean up the waste left untreated by previous mines in the area. This was very important for the state because it would allow the area to be redeveloped. In order to do all this, multiple ponds and dams were constructed over a 5-6 kilometer area in and around the mine site, so that the ore tailings from the separation of the gold could be stored in water, as was done in many other mining operations. These dams had an inner wall and a smaller outer wall. In the channel between them, overflow water was collected and pumped back to the plant for reprocessing. According to the plan, as the wastewater held by the dam increased over the years, the walls of the dam would be gradually raised through gradual construction. In other words, the company didn't want to waste time and money building a big wall in the first place. It could have been added to over time anyway, and this shortcut would have led to disaster. The Aurul mine's risk level was classified as normal by the government. Therefore, risk management was not as high as in mines that were considered riskier. In any case, mining operations in Romania at that time were not strictly regulated. This was one of the main reasons why the Australian company wanted to open the mine here. Since the sole purpose of a company is to make as much profit as possible and move on to the next mine, they did not spend much time monitoring potential risks, which is precisely why they lacked the tools to foresee the disaster that would come only 6 months after the mine started operating. In the winter months between 1999 and 2000, snow fell heavily in the region. This snow accumulated on the walls of the dam and the surrounding land. In fact, if the company had had proper planning, they could have immediately shoveled this snow and moved it to a safe area. But they did not. The melting of the snow that had accumulated in the vicinity, coupled with the rains, caused the water in the dams carrying the wastewater to rise much faster than the company had anticipated. On the night of January 30th, 2000, one of the dam walls completely collapsed and the dam waters began to spread with tremendous force. The biggest problem with this water was that the gold and silver extracted from the area was so dilute that an even higher than normal amount of cyanide had to be used. This excess cyanide began to flow down the hillsides with the water gushing out of the collapsed dam walls, and the Sasar River was located next to the mine. The Sasar River flows into Lapis, Lapis into Somes, Somes into the Tisa, and Tisa into the Danube, the second longest river in Europe. The 100,000 cubic meters of water that leaked from the mine, containing 115 tons of cyanide and many more heavy metals, followed this very route. reaching Romania, Hungary, and then Yugoslavia within weeks. The fact that company officials were lax and slow to warn the Romanian government would lead to the second largest environmental disaster in European history, after Chernobyl. Cyanide is a very powerful poison that can kill living things very quickly. Fortunately, cyanide is not a substance that can persist in nature for very long periods of time, and over time, especially when exposed to sunlight, it decomposes into other compounds. However, cyanide poisoning can still occur through underground and surface sources. Eating food grown on cyanide-contaminated soil, breathing cyanide into the air, and even touching cyanide-contaminated soil. Heart attacks, shortness of breath, seizures, and blood pressure problems are seen in all animal species, including humans, exposed to cyanide. Even in individuals who survive, long-term neurological damage can occur. This is exactly what happened in the Aurul mine disaster in 2000. In a short period of time, cyanide concentrations in the Sasar River reached 8 times higher than even Romania's relatively lax criteria allowed. This amount of cyanide would have wiped out life in the river that had been flowing for thousands of years, causing it to be called a dead river to this day. Not only in the Sasar, but also in the Lapis, Somes, and Tisa rivers, arsenic levels reached 100 times the permitted level, and lead levels 1,000 times higher. In the waters that remained on Hungarian territory and connected to the Romanian rivers, these metals were all above safe levels. Even in the Maros River, which is technically not expected to be affected by the leak, lead levels were 4 times higher than the acceptable level. This was because even rivers that were not directly connected to each other were connected by underground springs. A similar situation was seen in Yugoslav rivers and, of course, in the Danube Delta. Because of all this poisoning, whatever was drinking these waters, cats, dogs, swans, deer, foxes, pigeons, rabbits, and of course fish, started dying in masses. Many people were hospitalized, but fortunately none received a lethal dose of poison. The damage to non-human species and the environment was a tragedy in itself. It is not even possible to count the individual fish that died, but it is thought that around 1,200 tons of fish were wasted due to cyanide poisoning. In the aftermath of the disaster, the diversity of fish in the river, especially carp, catfish, and pike, has almost completely disappeared. The water quality deteriorated rapidly, making it undrinkable for any living creature for years. It took more than 10 years for nature to recover. Of course, the fear of poisoned waters resulted in the local population stopping eating fish and wildlife for decades. Tourism almost completely ceased, and the already weak economy of the region completely collapsed. Well, in the aftermath of such a disaster, the company has never claimed responsibility, saying that the fish died from cold or rain, not cyanide. The company's sole purpose was to extract the gold and take advantage of Romania's environmental laws, which are much weaker than in the rest of Europe. The government at least managed to warn the Hungarian and Yugoslav authorities in a timely and organized manner, and thus prevented an even bigger disaster.